I received a video request from a recent viewer. Mark writes, "I love what you do. I've learned so much from your videos, but I do have one question. Why don't you have a detailed video on response prevention? I've seen countless videos on the exposure part of ERP, but no one really talks about response prevention." I thought Mark had a great point. And nothing is more important in any type of exposure therapy than response prevention. Exposures get all the attention, but the brain learning happens during the response prevention. In this video, I will detail the ins and outs of how to do response prevention during and following exposures. These tips will help you to improve the strength and the effectiveness of ERP, exposure and response prevention therapy, for anxiety, phobias, and OCD. You'll want to listen until the end because I cover a lot of information and I give a response prevention example at the end. As I said, the most important, the most critical component of any exposure therapy. And without it, the treatment likely will be ineffective. Response prevention means that you are resisting the urge to do certain physical and mental behaviors and rituals in an effort to calm that anxiety and discomfort, not only during and after an exposure, but anytime you feel anxious or triggered. When clients engage in avoidance, safety, or compulsive behaviors, they reinforce the idea that their anxiety is justified and that their fears are legitimate. The purpose of doing exposures and response prevention is to give your brain opportunities to learn that you're safe and to learn that you're capable of coping with your thoughts, sensations, and feared situations. Now, response prevention includes resisting physical and mental compulsions while not avoiding those triggers and not performing any safety and reassurance seeking. That's quite a lot to be aware of, but it contributes to practicing effective response prevention. As I explained, exposing yourself to your feared situation, activity, or thoughts will do little good unless you are practicing good response prevention. In fact, you can experience improvement and even recovery by practicing only response prevention when you're triggered in the moment, as long as you're not avoiding anything, without even going to the trouble of planning an exposure. A few years ago, my husband and I took a trip to Spain with some college friends. And during that trip, we visited one of our college friends who lives on the island of Majorca, Spain. Now, Majorca is an incredibly scenic island with beautiful cities, villages, beaches, and mountains. Did I tell you that I have a fear of driving through the mountains? It rarely pops up for me because I live in Michigan where there's no mountains. But due to a traumatizing car accident on a mountain road when I was a kid, I have an intense fear of riding in a vehicle through the mountains. Now, Majorca is famous for its treacherous mountain roads that in many spots, only one car can pass and the guardrails are almost non-existent. And I was shocked that none of my friends seemed to have a problem with this. But my husband drove the rented van through the mountain passes, and well, I was gripping the car seat for dear life. I couldn't bring myself to look down the mountainside. That's what you call white knuckling it. And I was doing everything I could to distract myself and avoid the experience. This could have been a great opportunity for me to work on my fear, yet I did not practice response prevention, and therefore most likely reinforced my fear. Our fears are reinforced by avoiding, white-knuckling it, or staying contracted, distracting ourselves, performing physical or mental compulsions, using safety behaviors, and seeking reassurance. I was doing all of those things. Response prevention means resisting those strategies to avoid discomfort. One important thing to point out is that response prevention does not end at the end of the exposure. Response prevention continues after the exposure, sometimes forever, depending on the circumstances. First, before you can practice response prevention, you need to identify your physical compulsions, your mental compulsions, what you're avoiding, and your safety behaviors. So I suggest making those lists. Let me break this down and define them a little bit more, and then I'm going to go a little deeper. Physical compulsions include repetitive physical behaviors that you use to calm yourself. Things like rechecking your car mirrors, rechecking your pulse, washing your hands, tapping on things, checking locks, breathing a certain way, re-entering rooms, rewriting emails, those kinds of things. Mental compulsions are thinking rituals, things that you're doing intentionally in your mind. Examples include ruminating, analyzing, counting, praying, repeating things, saying things out loud to cancel other things, mentally checking on what you're thinking, feeling, or sensing in your body. Avoidance behaviors include decisions that you make that lead to avoiding your anxiety or discomfort. I avoided looking out the window on that mountain road. You might avoid things like exercising alone, flying, touching door handles, using knives, being alone, going to the grocery store, driving on the highway. Safety behaviors include all of those things that you do that you try to feel a little bit safer. Having somebody with you on a driving exposure is a safety behavior. It doesn't guarantee your safety, but it makes you feel better. Carrying around food and water or medicine, just in case, those are other safety behaviors. Checking for exits in local hospitals are also common. And a big one is carrying around a cell phone. You know, we used to survive before there were cell phones. Now, safety behaviors are usually the last things we give up when doing exposures, but it's great if you can give these things up cold turkey, but most people that, can't do that right away, and they work them into their exposures, first doing the exposure and then doing it again, giving up that safety behavior. Again, to practice response prevention, you resist the urge to do physical and mental compulsions, and you resist those safety behaviors and avoiding your fear triggers. Now I'm going to go a little bit deeper into how to do response prevention, starting with physical compulsions. Again, people do physical compulsions or repetitive behaviors to calm themselves when their fear's been triggered. These are usually pretty obvious behaviors to most people. For example, somebody with contamination OCD might have a compulsion to excessively wash their hands. To practice response prevention, we want them to stay in that exposure and not wash their hands. So people usually stop me right away and they say, wait a minute, Paige, you're telling me that you want me to stop these compulsions, and then you want me to stop them, and not only during the exposure, but following the exposure forever. Well, yes, that's what I'm saying. Well, Paige, that's impossible. I do have to wash my hands sometimes. I can't go through my life and never wash my hands again. So for those situations where you have to do that behavior, and at some point you set some rules. So in the case of contamination OCD and hand washing, the rule might be that you wash your hands for 20 to 30 seconds following using the restroom and before preparing food. And I encourage my clients to wash very poorly, not perfectly. And there are some things that we do to help people feel that they've been recontaminated following hand washing when we're working with contamination OCD. But I'm not going to get into that right now in this video. But what I want you to keep in mind is that you do not want to fix it. Your brain stops learning from the exposure once you stop response prevention. So you don't want to stop response prevention. You want to keep practicing it indefinitely. Let me pause here and say that you are always in charge of what you do, and you get to choose the process, you get to choose what steps you take and whatever pace that you want to go. Not everyone can stop their physical compulsions or mental compulsions cold turkey. We work those steps into therapy, but there are some things that you can do if you cannot stop your rituals. For example, you can change, delay, and mix up how you perform the rituals or compulsive behavior. You can increase the amount of time you delay before performing the ritual. You can shorten the ritual. You can change the sequence or the way that you do the ritual. If there's an order in how you do a compulsion, you can change that order. In fact, there's many different ways that you can mess with that compulsion and mix it up and delay it, and the more you mix it up, the better it is. That is still practicing response prevention. You're still teaching your brain that you're the one in charge, not your anxiety or OCD. So eventually your goal is to eliminate that ritual altogether, but there are all these different things that you can do and make progress while you're working toward that goal. Next, I'll review practicing response prevention for mental compulsions. Now, mental compulsions are much more difficult to identify because for most of us, it feels like it happens automatically. You may not even be aware that you're doing it. Mental compulsions include mental activities like ruminating, analyzing, trying to figure something out, trying to figure out if that bodily sensation is still happening or if it's dangerous. For some people, their mental compulsions might include counting, repeating phrases, praying, saying something positive after having a negative thought, trying to cancel that out, mentally checking on whether or not they're still thinking about something or if they're experiencing a certain emotion, reaction, or sensation. But we can create what we go looking for. It's like that old "don't think of a pink elephant" thing. And then, of course, you think of the pink elephant. And even wishing our thoughts away or wishing our symptoms away is a form of mental compulsing. The purpose of mental compulsions, the same as physical compulsions, is to relieve us of our distress and discomfort in the moment and trying to resolve our doubt or uncertainty about something that's important to us. Again, you must be aware of your mental compulsions before you can really work on interrupting them and eventually stopping them. Now, stopping mental compulsions is challenging, but it can be learned and done in stages. Now, identifying the mental compulsion is one way to separate that mental activity from yourself. So I encourage people to use a diffusion technique from ACT therapy by identifying the compulsion when they're doing it. So you can say something like, "I am mentally checking on that sensation," or "I'm ruminating," or "I'm counting." My I am technique includes this diffusion technique, and it works very well to help people identify and eventually stop their mental compulsions. I'll leave you a link to a video below reviewing that technique. Now, other diffusion techniques include saying your thought or worry very slowly, or saying it in a funny voice, or repeating it very, very rapidly over and over again, and even singing the thought helps. These techniques are all methods of loosening the hold and the impact that the mental compulsions have and allowing you to eventually stop them altogether. Resisting the urge to use physical or mental compulsions and to engage in activities and situations that you've avoided without using safety behaviors is challenging, to say the least. You might be thinking, "Paige, you're telling me all these things that I can't do. What can I do during response prevention?" Well, you can challenge yourself in the stages as you build up your confidence. You can coach yourself in very encouraging ways. You can say things to yourself like, "I can cope through this. I'm welcoming this anxiety to stay for as long as it wants to. I'm allowing these thoughts and feelings and sensations to be here. I'm getting better at tolerating this doubt and this uncertainty." Let me run through an example of Carl. Carl has cardiac-related health anxiety, OCD. Carl is focused for most of his day on whether or not he is sensing a racing heartbeat, palpitation, or skipped beats. He's already been to the ER several times in the past year, and he's had multiple cardiac workups and tests. Now, his doctors and tests all report that everything is in working order and that Carl has a healthy heart. Carl's fear triggers are feeling his heart sensations, including a racing heart, palpitation, or skip beat, as I said. His physical rituals and safety behaviors include compulsively checking his pulse, wearing devices to monitor his heart, going to the ER or staying close to the hospital, calling to seek reassurance from his doctor, seeking reassurance on social media cardiac-related forums, Googling cardiac symptoms, eating something when he begins to feel anxious about it, pacing, getting a drink of water, trying to use an app to calm his breathing, making sure he's not alone. His mental compulsions are mentally checking on whether or not he's sensing a change in his heart rhythm or movement. And he's worrying about his symptoms and whether his doctors maybe missed something. He's analyzing everything he did and he ate that day and the previous day to try to explain what he's feeling. He's wondering if a new supplement or medication he took caused this. He's wishing and praying for these symptoms to go away. His avoidances are avoiding all the plans during the day that he had. He cancels meetings. He cancels going to the gym. He's avoiding social activities. He's avoiding driving, and he's avoiding being alone. For response prevention, Carl takes off his devices and monitors. He leaves his phone and his tablets in his office. He notices his heart racing, including palpitations and skips beats, but he welcomes the sensations to be there, and he even feels his anxiety rising. He wants to check, but he's made a decision to practice response prevention. Carl makes the decision to not communicate what he's experiencing with his wife in this moment. He's practicing tolerating the anxiety. He's tolerating his concern. Instead, Carl walks out to the backyard where his boys are playing catch, and he hears their laughter. He feels the sun on his face. He's aware that his anxiety and his discomfort is still there, but he's determined to not fall back to his compulsions. He picks up a baseball glove and he gets into the game of catch with his sons. He does his best to be in the moment, even if he's distracted by his sensations and his worry. He figures that even 10% enjoyment is better than nothing, and he continues to play catch with his sons. Response prevention is difficult. It's challenging. Be as compassionate as you can to yourself as you're training your brain that you're safe and that you can tolerate these thoughts, sensations, anxiety, and discomfort. Encourage and praise yourself for every effort that you make, because there's no perfection here. It may also help to remind yourself why you're working on response prevention. Perhaps you're trying to get your life back from OCD, or you're trying to regain your freedom of movement again from agoraphobia. Reminding yourself why you're doing this can help to keep you motivated and stay with it through that discomfort. If you need more help in these areas, I have courses and support groups, and you can find them at pagepradco.com. And feel free to contact me there. And in the description below, I left you a link and a guide to use ERP to be free from OCD phobias and anxiety. So until next time, I'll see you in session. Take care. Bye-bye.